HTML5 and ES5, ES6 and higher versions. Now Angular have a support for differential loading. Angular is using differential loading. Actually, this differential loading is nothing but maintaining separate library for older version browsers and higher version browsers. That means modern browsers. It can differentiate the request coming from browser. It can identify from which browser request is coming and whether it is capable of handling advanced. If not, then it will automatically load an older version, means it will load the library for legacy. Then it will load the library for modern. It can differentiate. That is what the advantage of, differential loading. That is one key feature of Angular. Another important feature is Angular supports IV. So it is an rendering engine. It is an rendering engine. So which is now a part of Angular from 9 version. Angular supports IV. Older versions of Angular, they don't have this IV rendering engine. And which is now a part of Angular from 9 version. Earlier version means before Angular 9, Angular 8 version was there. And if you want to use IV engine in Angular 8, you have to explicitly install it and enable it, because they started it as an experiment for Angular in Angular 8. So it is not mandatory there. But now in Angular 9, they introduced this as an integral part, integrated it. Now Angular is using a rendering engine called IV. And the speciality of IV rendering engine is nothing but it is more faster in rendering than previous. So applications will take less startup time. But the key point is, so IV is a rendering engine. IV supports dynamic compiling. It supports dynamic compiling. One of the ability of IV is it supports dynamic compiling. Dynamic compiling means, here what is the specialty is you can change and run. You can change and run your code. You don't need to compile every time. Actually, you will see that internally it is compiling, it is working. That means actually, in general, what should happen is you return some logic. After writing the logic, you compiled it. After compiling, output is generated. Suppose output is generated in a page. Now what you are doing is you are making some changes in the code. When you are making changes in the code, after making the changes, every time you have to compile those changes. But IV can dynamically compile. That means You make the changes. Don't worry about compiling. Go to output and refresh the output. Those changes are available. That means it is simply like edit and run, edit and run. There is no point like you compile it manually. So that means you simply edit and run. Then it starts, means dynamically it will compile. Dynamically it will compile. That means one important point is several operations are resolved at runtime, are resolved at runtime. Hence, it it reduces the compile time, and enables faster startup of application. So this is now integrated with the Angular 9 version. It is integrated with Angular 9 version. So it is officially now a part of Angular. Earlier versions before Angular 9, so we don't have this. So we can explicitly use it. But in older versions, it will not even support it. So, but it supports in Angular 8 explicitly because it is just a pre-release at that time. Now, finally, it is integrated and made available with Angular. So, Angular supports Ivy as a rendering engine now. So we can use Ivy as a rendering engine. This makes Angular application more faster in startup. So technically important features of Angular, it supports all these frameworks for building, debugging, testing, deploying, whatever tools are required, it is available. So Angular supports the frameworks like Ionic, Apache Cordova to make the applications cross-platform. It supports frameworks for MVC, MVP, MVVM like, which are used for building and controlling the application flow, right? And it is modular and component based. It makes Angular more faster than AngularJS. And Angular supports differential loading. It reduces the browser compatibility issues. And it uses a rendering engine called Ivy. It supports dynamic loading, dynamic compiling. Right? Many operations are resolved at runtime by saving the compile time. That makes application faster in startup. Now in Angular, these are the key structural features actually. These are the key structural features. Internally, several changes happened in version to version that you cannot understand until or unless you learn the topic. Why? Because suppose if I say that in Angular 9, they have introduced route guards. Obviously, you will not understand because you don't know what is a route guard. So you don't know what is a route. So then without knowing a route, how you will understand that there is a route guard? That is the reason. So all technical features and differences are for the people who already know it. That is the reason the right time of comparing one version to another version is towards the end, not towards the beginning. That means once you learned Angular, after learning Angular, you can understand what is difference between Angular different versions. Because technically, even if I explain those differences, you cannot catch them or understand because you don't know them at all.